Welcome to this lesson on virtual meetings. In this section, we will talk about the characteristics of the meeting participants. If you have a virtual meeting, you have to cater to the special needs of the people in your meeting, and they are sometimes different than in physical meetings. So let's have a look at 6 characteristics that you have to take into account. The first thing you need to know is that members in virtual teams often don't know each other very well. In ISAC, this especially applies if we look at the NSB, that is holding telcos with all the VPs of one specific function. They usually only meet on conferences but don't really know each other the way a physical team knows each other. So it is important that you know how you can actually still create some sort of trust in a team. In virtual work, trust is usually only measured through reliability. So especially you as a meeting leader have to be reliable and always on time, but this also applies to all the other meeting participants. In a virtual meeting, you also sometimes forget who's actually present in the meeting because not everyone is speaking all the time. So it's really important that you kind of get the team together and make them get to know each other and also trust each other as one team. The second point is that in virtual communication, people cannot really tell irony or interpret ambiguity because body language and mimics and intonation clues are often missing. Intonation clues also especially apply to email communication, which is also a part of virtual communication. So take into account that you have to label your emotions clearly in order to make sure people understand what you've been saying, and also avoid ambiguity at all costs. This means that you have to state clearly and precisely what you mean, and if you want to joke, then you also have to label it. A good help for this are emoticons that you can include in emails or also in chat communication. The third point refers to the attention span of your participants. Usually in a virtual meeting you only hear people talk, but you don't have anything visual to focus on. So this decreases the attention span of all the participants drastically. Usually people can only focus about 10 minutes. So for you, this implies that you have to plan your meeting in shorter, about 10-minute segments, and always think about re-energizing your people in the meeting in between. So for that, you can use short icebreakers, for example, or tell a joke in between, ask a personal question to socialize with your team members, to energize them and bring them back on focus. The fourth part is that people in virtual meetings tend to multitask, and that means that they will get distracted. Your worst enemy in virtual meetings is always the mute button, when people can mute themselves so that you don't hear what they're actually doing. Often they will check emails in between, talk to roommates, get a drink, and not really pay attention to the entire meeting. So in order to avoid that people actually miss important input and that they focus on the meeting, you should check regularly that everyone is still actively involved. For that, a speaking order is really helpful, or just ask everybody to quickly raise their hand or write a comment in the chat so that you know that people are still listening and focusing on what you have to say. The fifth part is also focused on the fact that virtual teams are often dispersed over space and time. So this actually implies that they usually have a lack of common or shared understanding because they cannot constantly synchronize and modify their actions and expectations, so it's really hard to keep aligned. What this means is that people will meet in the virtual meeting, but then they will only see each other again in the next virtual meeting, which might be in 2 weeks' time or in a month's time. And in the meantime, they will all evolve on their different paths and will probably go into different directions. And it's really hard to actually streamline your actions in between your virtual meetings. So for you, it's important that you not only coordinate your team via the meetings that you have, but also check in between that people actually talk to each other, share their progress, and really check where everyone is going and where they are standing. The last point kind of touches on this the previous point, because virtual teams also engage in relatively little spontaneous and informal water cooler communication. This means that they usually don't really talk informally, where they can get to know each other first of all, but informal water cooler communication is also a great source to spark innovation, new ideas, and collaboration. And this is missing in virtual teams because usually when you communicate in a meeting, you follow a strict agenda, but there is not really room for brainstorming, for sharing ideas, and for getting a bit off topic because everyone will try to be as efficient as possible and see it as a distraction. Actually, this is a really great disadvantage of virtual meetings, and you should try to find a substitute for the virtual informal water cooler communication in some sort of way. Whether that be a hangout for the team after the actual meeting is finished, or whether that be regular phone calls that you initiate amongst the team members, doesn't really matter as long as you try to substitute this informal communication. Also, what we usually tell in ISAC is that you can just pick up the phone and call your colleague, but in reality, hardly anybody ever does it. So you can encourage your team members to actually call their colleagues and exchange ideas and ask for support, but the outcome will not be as reliable as you might hope to, so take that into account when managing your team. Those are the most important characteristics of the meeting participants that you will encounter in virtual meetings. Thank you for listening, and in the next section, you will learn what this actually implies for you as a meeting leader.